right. It's not ESPN's 30 for 30, but it's my 98 for 98. Check that out. 98 seasons of the New York Football Giants, every one of their seasons. I'm trying to get it done in 98 days. I don't think it's going to possibly happen, but I'm trying to get it done before the start of the regular season, which is obviously starts in September. So I still have June, July, and August, a little bit of May left, and a little bit of September. So I got at least 100 days or so. So I should be able to get my 98 for 98 done by the beginning of the season. So, but we're forging ahead here, right? We're up to 1935, season number 11 for the New York Football Giants. Now, remember, the NFL started in 1920. The Giants started in 1925. So if this is the 11th season for the New York Giants, it's therefore the 16th season in the history of the National Football League. The National Football League, they started the championship games in 1933. So this season, 1935, would be the third season for the history of the championship games. And once again, 1935 be very, very good to the New York Football Giants. Once again, they would find themselves in the championship game. Unfortunately, the Giants, pre-Super Bowl era, we're going from when the championship game started, 1933, to 1965, which was the last season that they had a championship game that did not go into a Super Bowl. Right, the last game was 1965. The Packers beat the Browns 23-12. So that was the last championship game that did not go to a Super Bowl. After that, 1966, the Packers beat the Cowboys 34-27. They went to Super Bowl one. 1967, at the Ice Bowl, the Green Bay Packers beat the Dallas Cowboys 21-17. They went on to Super Bowl too. So basically, the championship series era that did not include Super Bowls afterwards was from 1933 to 1965. So from 33 to 65, the Giants won 14 championship games. They did very well for themselves. The problem is that they only won 3 of those 14. They lost 11. They lost 4 to the Bears. They lost 4 to the Packers. They lost 2 to the Colts. And they lost this one, 1935, to the Detroit Lions, who early in their existence were the Portsmouth Spartans. In 1934, it was the first season that they moved to Detroit. Up to 1933, they were in Portsmouth, Ohio. And in 1934, they moved to Detroit, where they became the Lions. And it's 1935, they were obviously still Lions, and they still are the Lions to this day. But this will be the first championship that the Detroit Lions haven't won since 1957. What the heck was it? I think, if I remember correctly, the 1957 is the last season that the Detroit Lions won a championship. I think they won. I think it was 59-14. They beat the Cleveland Browns. That was Jim Brown's, who sadly just passed away recently. That was his rookie season, 1957. He played from 57 to 65. He played 9 seasons, and he just retired. So the Detroit Lions, their final championship was in 1957. So they're jonesing, they're starving there for a Super Bowl title there, big time in Detroit. But 1935, they had a very good team, very good offense, good defense, good solid overall team, and they wound up winning. They also snapped, the Bears had won the division 3 years in a row. They won a 32, they won a 33, 34. In 1934, the Bears were undefeated too, going into the championship game. And the Giants wound up winning in the sneaker game, 30-13. So the Giants snapped. Actually, the Bears had won in 1934 going into the championship game. The Bears had won 18 consecutive games. The Giants snapped that streak in the championship game. But the Detroit Lions were a very good team, very, very good team. The Giants were actually, they got a little bit better. 1933, the Giants were a good, solid team. They scored a lot of points. They had a good, solid defense. The championship game, they lost 23-21 to the Bears. It was one of the greatest championship games that nobody ever knows about, or because it's so old, it's nobody really cares about. But a great 1933 championship game, a phenomenal championship game. The Giants in 1934 took a little step back. Their defense still wasn't too bad, but their offense took a step back. They scored a lot less points than they had the year before. They scored in 1933, they scored like 240 odd points. In 1934, they scored 140 some odd points. So they scored like 100 points less in 1934 than they did in 1933. So they took a step back, and they won the division in 1934 with an 8-5 record. Very, very, very mediocre. I mean, they certainly did not run away with it. They're very fortunate that no other team in that division was really any good. Or the Giants probably wouldn't have gone to the championship game. The problem that this is 1935. In 2 years, the problem the Giants are going to have is that some guy by the name of Sammy Baugh is going to start playing for the Redskins, and Sammy Baugh was a game changer. He could throw the ball. So, but this is 1935. So let's start doing a little bit of reading up here on the 1935 NFL season. 1935 NFL season was the 16th regular season in the history of the National Football League. It was the 11th for the Giants, the 16th for the NFL. The season ended with the Detroit Lions' 26-7 victory over the New York Giants in the NFL championship game. Were it not for the cancellation of this is something which you might find a little odd, especially nowadays, but were it not for the cancellation of the Redskins-Eagle game on November 17th due to heavy snow, all of the teams would have played 12 games. That is not what happened before. I mean, all the other seasons, every team played different amount of games. So this would have been the first season all the teams would have played 12 games, which would have made 1935 the first season in which all NFL teams played the same number of games. The standardization of the league's schedule was formalized the following year and has continued ever since, with the number of games being slowly increased to 14 in 1961, 16 in 78, and 17 in 2021. The next season, you have teams play a different amount of regular season games would end up being in 2022 due to a canceled Bills-Bengals game due to the collapse of Damar Hamlin. Very, very sad. But he's rebounded from that. Fantastic. Great news. Great news. The major rule changes. The inbound lines or hash marks introduced 2 years early in 1933 were moved closer to the center of the field from 10 yards to 15 yards from the yard line, or 70 feet apart. So they were still far apart. Now, what happened in 1933? They had hash marks. Before that, like in 32 and 31 and all that, if you ran out of bounds, they moved the ball just a few yards in, and that's where you started to play from. Okay. But starting in 1933, they actually had hash marks 10 yards from the sidelines. They moved them in 10. So, so you had, so if you ran out of bounds, they moved the ball in 10 yards. Well, now they moved them in 15 yards from the sideline, which is, still a decent amount, but they were still 70 feet apart. That's a lot of real estate, 70 feet. Now, the thing is, you can imagine trying to kick a field goal from such an angle. So say you completed a pass, just say, and the guy he got tackled out of bounds, and it was now it's 4th down and a 3 yards short. Well, you want to try to kick a field goal. Well, they moved the ball in 15 yards, and that's the angle you got to kick from. That's an intense angle. Let's see. The width lasted for 10 seasons through 1944. The hash marks were moved to 20 yards from the sidelines, 40 feet apart in 1945, which lasted for 27 seasons. They were moved into the width of the goalpost, 18.5 feet in 1972. Okay. Let's see. Division races. Now, the Giants didn't really run away with this till the end. The Giants wound up 9-3. Their closest competitor was the Brooklyn Dodgers, who were 5-6-1. But toward the end of the season, it was still a tight race. And they had a game that would faced each other toward the end of the season, which really would have kept things really, really close. However, the Giants prevailed. In the Eastern Division, where the Giants were, now every season, since the Giants came into existence, there's been a different amount of teams. The year before, in 1934, there was 11 teams. The Cincinnati Reds played first 8 games, and then they folded. They got kicked out of the league for not paying league dues. The St. Louis Gunners played their final 3 games. So technically, in 1934, there were 11 teams. 1933, there were 10 teams. Every year, there was a different amount of teams. And here in 1935, there were 9 teams. Okay, in the Eastern Division, where the Giants were at, there was the Giants, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Boston Redskins, and the Philadelphia Eagles. In the Western Division, it was the Detroit Lions, the Packers, the Cardinals, and the Bears, Chicago Cardinals, and the Chicago Bears. So it was 9 teams. And in 1936, once again, there would be a different amount of teams. There won't be 9 teams. Every year, there's a different number of teams. Absolutely crazy. Okay, so we got division races. In the Eastern Division, the key game took place on Thanksgiving Day at Ebbets Field. Now, remember, I'm going to go over this as I go over the Giants' schedule. Every year, the Giants played on Thanksgiving, shall I say, back in the day, all right? They always played on Thanksgiving. They usually played on the road, and they always played a team that was from New York. This year, they played the Brooklyn Dodgers in Ebbets Field, where the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team played. So they played the Brooklyn Dodgers football team at Ebbets Field on Thanksgiving, November 28th. The Giants would prevail 21-0, which wound up being a huge game. Of course, let me tell you something. Okay, the key game happened on Thanksgiving Day at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, as the 5-4 Brooklyn Dodgers hosted the 6-3 New York Giants. A Brooklyn win would have tied the 2 teams at 6-4. The Giants wound up winning. The Giants were 9-3. The Brooklyn Dodgers wound up being 9-6. So the Giants won by 3.5 games. But I mean, at that one game, that Thanksgiving Day game, had the Brooklyn Dodgers won, they would have been tied. And things might have changed. But the Giants wound up winning 21-0 and went on to victories in their remaining 2 games to win the division championship comfortably with a 9-3 record. Now, as I said, this is the 3rd season in a row where the 3rd season where they've had 2 different divisions. The Giants have rather comfortably won the first 3 years, 1933, 34, and 35. They won the division rather comfortably because there was no other team that really challenged them, including this season. The Giants were 9-3. The Brooklyn Dodgers were 5-6. Pittsburgh Pirates are 4-8. The Boston Redskins were 2-8-1, and the Philadelphia Eagles were 2-9. Right. In the Western Division, all 4 teams were in a close race. On Thanksgiving Day, the Lions defeated the Bears 14-2, while the Cardinals won over the Packers 9-7, leaving the Lions 6-3-2 and the Cardinals 6-3-1. 3 days later, on December 1st, the Lions defeated Brooklyn 28-0, while the Cardinals tied the Bears 7-7. With this win, Detroit finished its season at 7-3-2 and eliminated the Packers and the Bears from contention, while the Cardinals stood at 6-3-2 with another game against the Bears coming up on December 8th. The Cardinals needed to win in order to force a playoff for the division title. However, the Bears won 13-0, and the Lions were division champions. So that the Cardinals almost got into the championship game. But this is interesting here because ties did not count. It says here, had the current post-1972 system of counting ties as half a win and half a loss been in place in 1935, the Packers at 8-4 would have tied the 7-3-2 Lions for the Western Division title with a winning percentage of .667, requiring a playoff. So if that was the case, if ties actually count as half a win and half a loss, they would have forced a playoff game between the Packers and the Lions to see who would have gone to the championship game. But the ties did not count in the standings until 1972. In 1932, the Bears had 6 ties. The Bears were 6-1-6. They had 6 ties. That's a lot of ties. Let's see. Ed Danowski, who was the passing leader for the season out of the NFL. He had 794 passing yards. He was the leader. Rushing was Doug Russell of the Chicago Cardinals. He had 499 yards, and the receiving was Charlie Malone of the Boston Redskins. He had 433 receiving yards. Now, if we go to the Giants here, 1935. Okay. Once again, as always, right? It was what happens pretty much every year with the Giants. They share the Polo Grounds with the New York Baseball Giants. So what happened every year would be the Giants would always start their first 2 to 4 games on the road, because for some reason, I'm imagining if the baseball Giants were to make it to the World Series, that would require for them to play end of September into October. So the Giants, I guess, scheduled their games where the end of September and halfway through October, they were out of town. They didn't, I guess, chew up the field, I guess, which, would happen. So the Giants every season from 1925, that is obviously 1935, so it's 11 straight seasons. They played all their games in the Polo Ground, their home games in the Polo Grounds. They always started the season on the road. And once again, this season was no exception. The Giants had their first 3 games on the road. The first game of the season, they beat the Pittsburgh Pirates. Pittsburgh Pirates are not very good. Now, I'm going to give you a little example of this. The Giants opened the season and they ended the season against the Pittsburgh Pirates. The Giants' first game of the season was on September 22nd. They played in Pittsburgh. They won 42-7. Second game of the season, they played on the road. Once again, it was September 29th. They played in Green Bay. They lost 16-7 to the Packers. Third game of the season was Sunday, October 6th. They played the Boston Redskins, Fenway Park. They won 20-12. So after 3 games, the Giants were 2-1. Finally, they came home. Finally. The fourth game of the season was October 13th. So basically, pretty much like after the World Series would have ended, October 13th, the World Series, even the New York Baseball Giants would have played in the World Series. The World Series the baseball season would be over. So the Giants started at home on October 13th against the Brooklyn Dodgers. They won 10-7, so that put the Giants record at 3-1. Following week on October 20th, the Boston Redskins came to the Polo Grounds, and the Giants prevailed once again 17-6. So now the Giants stood at 4-1. However, they were going to have some tough games coming ahead. Tough games. On October 27th, Sunday, the Chicago Cardinals came to town, and the Chicago Cardinals won 14-13. The Giants had a grand total of 5 first downs in the whole game. Let's see, was it? I'm trying to see if it was 2 field goals. No, it looks like the Giants missed an extra point. The first field goal, Ed Danowski had a 1-yard run, and looks like the field goal kicker. I mean, it looks like maybe Harry Newman missed the extra point, so that's why the Giants lost 14-13. So had they kicked the extra point, that would have been a tie. The following week, the Chicago Bears came to town on November 3rd. The Giants would lose once again to the Chicago Bears, 20-3. So now all of a sudden, the Giants were 4-1. Now all of a sudden, now they're 4-3. Things aren't looking so comfortable for them. Then they had to go on the road and play the Bears. They played the Bears back-to-back games. So you figured they lost at home to the Bears 20-3. What are they going to do in Wrigley Field in Chicago? Well, they wound up winning. They won 3-0. So finally, they snapped their 2-game losing streak, and they wound up becoming 5-3. Now they were 4-3. They wound up winning their final 5 games. They ran off 5 in a row, and it was pulled away with the division. They beat the Chicago Bears 3-0 to go 5-3. The following week, the Philadelphia Eagles came to town, played in the Polo Grounds on November 24th, Sunday, November 24th, and they beat the Eagles 10-0. Now, pretty much every year the Giants played on a Sunday, then they played Thanksgiving, and then they played the following Sunday. So pretty much every year the Giants would play 3 games in 8 days. This was no exception. They played Sunday, November 24th against the Eagles. Then they played Thursday, November 28th, Thanksgiving, Thursday, November 28th, Thanksgiving in Brooklyn against the Brooklyn Dodgers, and they won 21-0. Then 3 days later, on Sunday, they played again on the road against the Philadelphia Eagles, and they beat the Philadelphia Eagles 21-14. So now the Giants are 8-3, and the division's over with. They officially won. The final game they played at home against the Pittsburgh Pirates was meaningless. They played the Pittsburgh Pirates on Sunday, December 8th. They beat the Pittsburgh Pirates 13-0, and I was just showing you is that Pittsburgh Pirates had 2 first downs in the whole game. 2. They had grand total of 67 yards. They had 52 passing yards. They had 15 rushing yards for the whole game. 15. They had 67 total yards, and they had 2 first downs. I mean, you think some of the offense we see nowadays are brutal. Well, could you imagine watching the game? Could you imagine your team? You say your team was the Pittsburgh Pirates, and you went to go see them, and they wound up losing 13-0, and not only that, but they only had 2 first downs the whole game. That's pretty brutal. Well, the Pittsburgh Pirates wouldn't be in existence much longer. So the Giants finished 9-3. I mean, they had a good team. A good team. They scored a lot more points. They scored 147 points, I think it was, in 1934. Well, this year they scored 180. So their points per game went up. Their defense was solid. They gave up 96 points. They averaged giving up 8 points per game. So basically, on defense, they gave up a touchdown a game. They scored 15 points a game. So basically, they outscored their opponents 15-8. So basically 2 touchdowns to 1, pretty much the whole year. So they were just a good, solid team. I mean, the Detroit Lions were pretty much the same. The Giants scored 180 points during the season. The Lions scored 191. The Giants had a better defense. The Lions gave up 111 points. The Giants gave up 96. I mean, nothing big. Nothing. The Giants averaged giving up 8 points per game. The Lions gave up 9.3. However, the Lions scored more points. The Lions averaged 15.9 points per game. The Giants averaged 15. So it was very, very close. I mean, the Giants' defense was a little bit better. The Detroit Lions' offense was a little bit better. So a very, very good, a good championship game. But didn't turn out to be that way. For whatever, I mean, the Lions and there was the Portsmouth Spartans. It was the Portsmouth Spartans up until 1933. 1934, they became the Detroit Lions. They always gave the Giants a very difficult time. Usually, the Lions / Spartans wound up beating the Giants. The Giants won from time to time, but the Spartans and / Lions always gave the Giants a very difficult time. And once again, in this championship game, it was no different. The Lions would wind up prevailing. It was played now once again. The Western Division hosted the odd-numbered year championship games. The Chicago Bears hosted the 1933 championship game. The Detroit Lions in the Western Division hosted the 1935 championship game. The Giants in the Eastern Division would host the even-numbered year. So that's why in 1934, the Giants hosted the 1934 championship game. The Giants hosted the 34 championship game. They hosted the 38 championship game, the 44 championship game, the 46 championship game, the 56 championship game, the 58 championship game, and the 62 championship game. They were on the road for the 33, the 35, the 39, the 41, the 59, the 61, 63 championship games. So the Giants, unfortunately, in the championship games, they were in 14 of them. They were 3-11, so they did not fare well in the championship games. So the 1935 NFL championship game was the third NFL championship game, which was started in 1933. Held on December 15th at University of Detroit Stadium, or I guess maybe now it's called Titan Stadium nowadays, in Detroit, Michigan. The 1935 champion of the Western Division was the Detroit Lions, who were 7-3-2, and the champions of the Eastern Division were the New York Giants, who were 9-3. The Giants were coached by Steve Owen. Now, Steve Owen is the all-time leader for the New York Giants in victories. 153. He was 153. He had 100 losses and I forgot what it was, 12 ties. He had a lot of ties. But I mean, he will probably, I mean, unless some superhuman like maybe Brian Daboll can hang around long enough and win enough games and all and everything, maybe he surpasses him. It ain't going to be easy. It ain't going to be easy because I mean, you figure for the most part, 153 wins. Daboll's going to have to coach for at least 15 years, and that's not easy to do in New York nowadays. But Owens was the coach for the Giants, Steve Owen. He coached from 1931 to 1953, so he coached for 23 seasons for the New York Giants. Once again, that I'm sure that'll probably never be broken. The Giants, coached by Steve Owen, were in their third straight title game and were defending champions, while the Lions, coached by George Potsy Clark, were in their first title game. 3 years removed from their nail-biting loss in the indoor 1932 playoff game at the Portsmouth Spartans. At 15,000 attendance, it was the least attended peacetime championship game in league history. Yeah, there were not many people. I mean, the Giants in 1935, they were starting to get used to bigger crowds. I mean, first game of the season, the Giants played in front of 24,000. They played in front of 30,000 in front of the Brooklyn Dodgers, 20,000 in front of the Redskins, 32,000 in front of the Cardinals, 40,000 in front of the Bears, another 19,000 in front of the Bears, 25,000 in front of the Brooklyn Dodgers. So I mean, the Giants were starting to come around. They were starting to obviously make some money because their attendance was good. I mean, because you're a good team, people want to see it. So we got the game summary. The weather in Detroit for the game was gray, wet, and windy, and the field at the University of Detroit's Titan Stadium was sloppy. The Lions took the opening kickoff and drove down the field for a touchdown. They were helped by two long passing plays, one of them, unfortunately, including one from Ace Gutowski that hit the Giants' Ed Danowski playing defense in the chest, and the ball was caught by a Detroit player. So it hit him in the chest, bounced off, and wound up going to Ed Kluwicki. Ed Kluwicki. Gutowski capped a 61-yard drive with a 2-yard touchdown run, and Glenn Presnell's kicked the extra point, give the Lions a 7-0 lead. The Lions scored another touchdown. It was the Giants threw an interception. The Lions ran the ball back 10, 15 yards or so, and just shortly after that, there was a twisting run by Dutch Clark, 40-yard run. If you ever see the highlights of it, he gets the ball, he goes through like the line, he goes to the left side, and then he cuts back almost all the way across the field to the right side, and by the time he gets all the way back across to the field to the right side, he's down by like around the 10-yard line or so, and he has like one player to beat. He runs past him and gets into the end zone for a twisting, turning 40-yard run. The extra point was missed, and the Detroit had a 13-0 lead going into the second quarter. The Giants scored to cut the lead to 6 on a long pass from Ed Danowski to Ken Strong. So at halftime, it was 13-7. The Giants, had a little glimmer of hope going in, but that was pretty much, all there was to be. I mean, the Giants really didn't threaten once again. The Giants had a grand total of 194 yards of offense. They had 2 first downs. They had 2 turnovers. They had 9 first downs. They ran the ball 44 times for 106 yards. Meanwhile, Detroit ran the ball 65 times for 246 yards. So basically, they averaged like 4 yards a carry. The Giants averaged like a little over 2 yards a carry. The Giants were 4 out of 13 passing. The Lions were 2 out of 5, but it really didn't matter because they ran the ball 65 times for 246 yards. So the Lions had almost 300 yards of offense. The Giants had 194. Each team had 2 turnovers. But the way the Lions were able to run the ball and just keep running and running and running, it was very, very difficult to stop. So basically at halftime it was 13-7. The third quarter was scoreless. All right. There were 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter by Ernie Cadell, and the future Lions coach Buddy Parker sealed the 26-7 victory in their first NFL championship for the Lions. In the fourth quarter, Ernie Cadell had a 4-yard run, and Clark kicked the extra point to put them up 20-7, and pretty much put the game out of reach, 20-7. But then Buddy Parker, the next time the Lions got the ball, scored on a 4-yard run. The extra point failed, but it didn't matter. They put the Lions up 26-7, and pretty much, put the game away. Let's see here. Legacy. When asked about the game over 70 years later, Glenn Presnell, who was also the last surviving member of the Detroit Lions' inaugural 1934 team, said this about the game: "I remember that it was a snowy day, very cold, and there were far less fans than there were in the 34 Thanksgiving Day game. In those days, people didn't go very often when it wasn't very nice weather." And if you ever see the highlights of this game, it was just a dark, miserable kind of day. And I'm sure it was very, very cold because in Detroit, it can be very, very cold. And we're talking December. And I'm sure it wasn't it's not like it is nowadays where you got the global warming and everything like that. It wasn't like that in 1935. I said here, I was the starting quarterback that game. And for most of the season, Potsy liked to start me and see what was going to on before sending in Dutch Clark. The one thing that stands out to me is that we scored in the first 2 minutes. I had thrown a flat pass to our blocking back on a fake for a 60-yard play to about their 4-yard line. Ace Godowski punched it over for the score, and I kicked the extra point. If we celebrated when we made a touchdown like the way they do today, we would have been hooted off the field. Say things are different. Back then, you score a touchdown, you hand the ball to the ref, and you run off the field. Not like the way it is nowadays. For winning the championship, we each received $300, which was a huge amount of money back then. We never got a championship ring like they do now, but it was certainly one of my proudest moments. Remember, professional football was not nearly as popular as college football and baseball was back then. Yeah, remember back then, in the 30s, the 20s and the 30s, college football, baseball, boxing were huge. Football, hadn't really taken off yet. He said it was much more exciting to play college football at Nebraska in front of 40,000 people. It was a way to make a living during the Depression. And that's a lot of what these guys did. I mean, there was just make enough money to, just to survive, especially during the Depression. Tough times. These were tough guys. They played both ways. They played 60 minutes. They didn't come off the field. I mean, and they did not make a lot of money. So we owe these guys a lot. But the 1935 season was once again a very successful season for the Giants. Once again, this is the third championship game. The Giants won all three of them. They won one, they lost two. So once again, it was a very successful season for the New York Giants, the 1935 season. They fell a little short, but they say you can't win them all, and the Giants did not win them all. But it was once again a very, very good season for the New York Football Giants. Well, that kind of wraps up the 1935 season, and I'll be back again tomorrow to bring up the 1936 season for the New York Giants, which just happened to be the 12th season in the history of the New York Giants. I'll see you then.